More than half of all companies globally are family-owned or operated. Family businesses contribute 70% of the world's GDP and account for 65% of jobs. Their voices are important. Their stories must be told. Brought to you by the award-winning publication, Tharawat magazine. This is the Family Business Voice with your host, Ramia.
On this episode of the Family Business Voice, we speak to Rob Lachenauer and Josh Baron from Banyan Global about their new book, the Harvard Business Review Family Business Handbook. We spoke about why family businesses are such adept survivors and why we should challenge common misconceptions about them. Enjoy this episode with Rob and Josh. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Family Business Voice. I'm happy to be here today with Josh and Rob. Welcome, guys.
Thank you so much for having us.
It's a delight to be here.
Fantastic. And we are here actually on a very special occasion because the two of you have just recently released a brand new book, which is entitled The Family Business Handbook, How to Build and Sustain a Successful, Enduring Enterprise. So essentially, how to make dreams come true, isn't it? This sounds amazing. Guys, talk to us about motivation. I know that you've both been in this field and advising family businesses for a really long time, have done so for many families around the world. But talk to us about this particular book. Like, what made you compile your insights into this particular work and why now?
I think one of the things is, as you know, the family businesses are the predominant form of ownership all around the world. And the data varies, but by country it will vary, but between, say, 35 and 80% of businesses are family businesses. And we were really struck after working for more than a decade with family businesses, how many misconceptions there are about family businesses. You read in the press that family businesses are hotbeds of conflict. When we work with our clients, there's often conflict, but often they're in there avoiding conflict. And the problem is more, they need actually more conflict to make the decisions they want. Another thing is that there's a misconception that family businesses don't last. It's this 3-generation rule. In fact, they outlast other forms of ownership. There's a sense that if you just fix the family dynamic, everything will be fine. When what we found working with great clients is family dynamic super important, and the decisions that owners make are really the key to the longevity of family businesses. We can list 10 other things that we think are misconceptions that we deal with in the book, and we're trying to break those myths and give a useful pathway for families that want to work together across generations.
I'll just add to that. I think, beyond just being a common form of ownership, really believe in the value of family ownership. Family businesses tend to be better employers. They're more responsible corporate citizens. They're better stewards of the environment. So I think we really see the value of family businesses to economies around the world. In our consulting practice, we'll only ever get to work with a small sliver of those family businesses. And so we've had the pleasure to learn over this time and share it with a much broader range of family businesses. And the last reason is because if Harvard Business Review asks you to write a book, the answer should probably be yes most of the time. And we've had a great partnership with HBR over really the last 8 or 9 years. And it just feels like a capstone of that work that we've been doing with them.
So that's the kind of call that you answer. That's for sure.
Exactly,
Like that's
exactly
the
right.
kind of call you pick up, guys, and that's the kind of book you will write when you're asked. So this is amazing. I think let's just dive a little deeper though, because actually, Rob, what you mentioned just before as one of the reasons, one of the motivators that you wrote this is there are all these misconceptions in and around family businesses. And I just wanted to quickly touch upon this. Why do you guys think that it's taken us so long to recognize the family business as an important economic player?
It's a great question. I think there's several factors. I'll mention a couple. I think Josh will also have some input on this. One of the things that drives it is that they are privately held and they don't have to report their financials or anything else. One of the chapters in the book we call Inform. And it's a choice as an owner who you inform about your family business. Most of the clients that we work with are super private. They don't want their business to be known, that they own it, but that's about it. So it's really hard for reporters to dig in to know what's going on, and importantly, for business schools to dig in and business professors to get any kind of good data about what's going on inside. When I went to business school, gosh, I would say, 5% of the cases were about family businesses, and 95%, when maybe half of the population that should have been studied was family businesses. There was one course out of probably 100 at business schools on family business. So the desire to maintain their privacy as owners and the lack of data coming through the system, I think, are two of the things.
I'll just add a couple. One is, I think they make for incredible dramatic stories. When you have this potent mix of, family dynamics and business and wealth and all this kind of stuff, when that goes wrong, it goes horribly wrong, right? And, it's sort of the stranger than fiction, and then actually makes for good fiction stories. If you think about, there's probably more, Rob said how many family business cases there are in business school. Compare that to how many family business dramas there are on TV. There's Succession. There's Dynasty Dallas. There's actually a long history of family business based dramas. And so I think that the stories that pop out into the news are really compelling. And that's what draws the attention. That's what sells magazines. That's what, that's what gets eyeballs on websites and TV shows.
Let's talk a little bit about fear mongering, or rather the context that we operate in today, because really, I don't think it's necessary with what we're looking at today as an environment. There doesn't seem to be any need to additionally add a sense of urgency, because quite frankly, this first quarter of this century has been just incredibly tumultuous and eventful. I mean, like from the very first year of the 2000s, we've been confronted with transformational events characterized, I would say, by extremely fast-paced change, and will be rewarding those that show extreme agility and innovation. Where does that leave the family business? Like, what are the ingredients and what makes for a successful family business in this particular century?
So the premise being, in this century to date, it's been really rough, and I would agree with that. COVID, the Great Recession, and many other things are sweeping through so many changes. They're sweeping through much, much faster. One of the things I would posit, I learned from this client, we're doing a growth strategy, and they're in the construction business, really up and down, and we're dealing with the third generation, but the second generation patriarch was still there. And from my BCG days, I was kind of pulling in the tools about how to grow a business, and it seemed the conversations were going great. And then one afternoon, the patriarch pulled me into his office, sat me down, and said, "Yes, boy, I want to make something really clear here. In our business, we survive first, we profit second, and we grow third. And if we get those out of order, we may not have a business to give to the next generation." So his focus on survival, you can almost be Darwinian about it and say survival of the fittest, is front of mind. If you are in a venture-backed firm and it goes under, what happens? You go to that next venture-backed firm. If you're in a family business, you've so much more. You would be the generation that didn't make it through. You probably lost your business. You probably hurt your family. You might have lost your identity. There's a focus on survival in difficult times, which I think is much deeper and profound and meaningful in a family business. So that's just a teaser. And then over to Josh.
I think there are things that family businesses are really good at and things they're not very good at. In terms of competing in a marketplace. And the things that they're not very good at are scale compared to if you think about scale as getting as big as you can, as fast as you can. In order to do that, you need access to as much capital as you can possibly get through public markets, through debt equity, all that kind of stuff. And when the competition is primarily about scale, then family businesses tend to suffer. And certainly in the West, in the 20th century, when we went through this whole massive industrialization, a period of economic growth that we had never seen before as a species, and probably will never see again, family businesses, had a tough time competing at the highest levels of the economy. And that is true today still. If we look at technology, fields of technology, anything where there's a winner takes all, first one to get there, those are things that family businesses are going to struggle at. And one of our colleagues and some folks at BCG did some research about family businesses across the business cycle. And it turns out that when the economy is doing really well, family businesses underperform non-family businesses. When the economy is doing very poorly, family businesses outperform. And over the course of a business cycle, at least the one they studied, they actually did better when you add the two together. And so I think that on the plus side, the things that family businesses are really good at are the kinds of things that Rob is talking about, that they're better at being resilient, of making very big changes very quickly. You could pivot a family business in a very short period of time because the owners are so connected to the management. There's a lot of alignment there. They're also very well positioned to do some of the stuff that's becoming increasingly important in this economy. If you look at the literature on sort of management today, people are focusing on employee engagement and sort of values-based leadership. Well, that's something family businesses have always been really good at. They're focusing on the difficulties of short-termism, of managing towards the quarterly earnings cycle as opposed to what really creates long-term economic value. Well, family businesses tend to have a generational time horizon, as Rob described, rather than a quarterly one. And there's a lot of focus on building trust with consumers, about being responsible environmental stewards, about paying attention to the community, about diversity and inclusion. These are things, again, family businesses, study after study says they're better at building trust than non-family businesses. So I actually believe very strongly, I think there's a lot of evidence to support this, that forget about Google and Facebook and, those kinds of companies. That gets 90% of the attention in the business world. But if you look at the vast majority of the business world about what's happening in most industries, the things that family businesses are innately good at are becoming more and more important, which gives them the ability to compete at the highest level in ways that probably wasn't true, at least in developed countries, probably 30 or 40 years ago.
I have a question with regards to what you both just said, because what I'm always intrigued by is, to be quite fair, I think for a lot of us as family businesses, family ownership is almost like a coincidence, right? Like it's not necessarily something that anyone went out with intention to build from the outset. This is probably most likely the case still in the second generation, like I'm in, or even in the third generation, and you actually know the founding story. I know our family business story is pretty much a coincidence, and I have no intention of pretending otherwise. It's really interesting though, right? Like, so how that pivotal moment, I guess, comes for any family business to decide whether family ownership actually is part of the competitive advantage. What have you guys seen in terms of that moment in time where a family sort of needs to have that conversation, whether family ownership should remain the priority and whether it constitutes a tangible competitive advantage? Are these always moments of succession, or are these moments of industry disruption, for instance? Can you give us some examples?
I think you're right. There's both the accidental family business and the purposeful family business. And there is a choice out there about what happens to your business when you're gone. And, I think ultimately there's not a right or wrong answer, but we really do encourage people to say, if you're going to create a family business, make sure you're willing to do the work. You don't just leave it behind and say, okay, I'll leave it to you to sort out, all these dynamics and challenges and so on. That's not my problem. I'm going to be dead. I've heard that one too many times. I'm going to be gone. Not my problem. You figure it out. Well, if you want it to last, of course, it is your problem. You have to help, put people in a position to be successful.
As owners, you can want whatever you want. You can want to grow your business to be really big. You can want to take a lot of money out. You can want to control the whole thing so that all of your cousins can work together. And no one's going to tell you. There's no shareholder other than yourself. There's no boss of owners. As owners, you're your own boss, which is both super cool and also kind of super scary because
Very
there's no,
stressful.
yeah,
Very stressful.
it's all about what you want. And
Yeah.
it's a little of a scary question to put out there. So what we try to do in the book is put a lot of tools in to say, if you ask that question, here's some decision guides, here's some frameworks to help you together make those kind of decisions.
So talking about family dynamics, which is also, I think, something that needs to be talked of more in the context of the family business. What do you guys think in terms of the changing family structures that we see these days? And, are we going towards a dialogue that is more open around family dynamics and their impact on decision making and ownership in the family business? Do you think we're able to slowly have that conversation at a very honest level?
Only with a lot of work would be my quick answer. Strikingly, at least half of our clients, probably 2/3 of our clients, at some time look at us in the eye and say, aren't we the worst family you've ever met? Because there's some conflict in the family. I don't like my brother. I couldn't make it. Da, da, da. What we see is the demands on the family relationships in a family business are so much higher than the demands on the Baron family or the Lachenauer family, because we don't have the family businesses. The decisions we make are, what to watch on Netflix on Saturday night, or what to have to dinner, or some are bigger than that, but nothing like the pressure cooker that happens in a family business. So no wonder it's tough to make great decisions together as a family, because if you're not doing the work, you won't be ready for the decisions. And that's why we say you got to do work in the owner room. We talked about there's a lot of work that we see in the family room about how to build family unity. And to your point about the expanding, kind of morphing modern family, our interpretation of that is that means more work.
It's challenging because families are programmed to get along. Like, there's a sense that, whatever issue it is, it's not worth ruining holiday, vacation, relationship over it. And so there's this expectation. I was talking to one family who really was struggling with a lot of conflict. And at one point, one of them just stood up and said, look, we don't have to be best friends. Like, for this family business to work, we have to be good business partners, which means finding common ground, finding common goals, learning to respect each other's contributions, the stuff that good business partners do. And if we want to also spend a lot of time together, that's wonderful. But I think there is this weight of expectations that really is built into families and therefore gets built into family businesses. This notion that don't ruin the holiday, don't ruin, this person's birthday because of some disagreement about a business issue or dividends or greed or whatever. Push that stuff under the rug. Right. And then this is what we were saying earlier about how, too little conflict is actually much more common in family businesses, because you just avoid all these issues. And then that either you just start disconnecting because the business starts to stagnate, your relationships feel less authentic if you can't be your true self, or it blows up. It's easy to say this, but most families just have to work on how do we have conflict in a more productive fashion.
I mean, I think a lot of what you guys are saying resonates so much and will resonate with most people that have a family business background. To be fair, though, I think context dictates a lot of what is possible here, right? Or what seems possible. The way we are raised, the cultural context we are raised in, like the economic context we are raised in. And as you both know, like a big part of Tharawat magazine being set up was because we wanted to have a more global conversation about family businesses. When you guys set out to write a handbook like that, how do you make sure that, and can it even be ensured that such a handbook is applicable across cultures, across the board? All of this totally resonates, but I think depending on what culture you're from or what context you're from, having these conversations is exponentially harder in some areas of the world than in others. What kind of a conversation did you guys have as co-authors about how can we make this applicable to as many contexts as possible?
This is always a question we get asked a lot. How much is the same and how much is different? In family businesses around the world. And my view is that it's somewhere like 80% the same. We actually talk in the book about this dynamic called sameness, which is that if you put people, no matter where they're from or their context, into a similar situation, they will behave similarly. And if you put a group of siblings together or a group of cousins together, or you've got a founder to a second generation transition, a lot of these dynamics are going to resemble each other in very powerful ways. And so I do think that there is an important extent to which what we're talking about should be, applicable in most contexts. Now, of course, there are important, contextual elements that are going to drive differences, and the ones that we point to in the book and I think we see in our practice are, the legal context is super important. So I think that, legal contexts are important, cultural contexts are important, but I think sometimes we overestimate the country culture and underestimate the family culture. Because even though, you're going to be influenced by the country of origin, you're going to be even more influenced by the specific things that have happened to your family. It's good to sort of be contingent and say these things vary, but also try to get away from the idea that, your family is so unique that there's nothing you can learn from others. There's a lot of value, there's a lot of experience that can be beneficial. You have to interpret it through your own lens.
I think for the sake of looking at these conversations almost like grids where you sort of cover the horizontals and verticals here, and let me throw in, I guess, a diagonal as to what we've been talking about right now, which is, of course, the whole conversation about next gen in the family business. So are you a good next generation owner if you're not actually active in the business? I think that's one of the very big questions that many next generation members face in consideration of the huge amount of wealth transference that we're facing in the next decade or so. Did you guys write this book with the next generation particularly in mind, or is it segmented more towards a senior generation that, is in charge? Because what we often see is that there's a segmentation of that kind of advice for family business members. And I was just wondering, who should read this book? Is it for everyone, and why?
The single most important word in the book is together. And we wrote it with that in mind. If you're in a family business system and you're the only one to kind of read it being current generation or next generation, it'll help a little. If you read it together in your family and talk about whatever ideas are useful for you together, that's really where you'll find the value, because eventually you will need to make decisions together. If there's a very strong patriarch, first generation, and he's saying, this is a family business, and the next generation, the kids, aren't interested, he doesn't have a family business. He has a single generation family business.
I mean, that's our hope, is that people use this as if you read the book, and we hope you do, that you use it as a chance to have some of these conversations. And we'll feel like we've been successful if it spurs you to have some of those conversations and to find some practical things that you can do differently as a family.
The Harvard Business Review Family Business Handbook: How to Build and Sustain a Successful, Enduring Enterprise. Thank you very much to the authors, Josh and Rob, for being on the Family Business Voice today. Everyone can click on the link below this podcast to go and check out the book and hopefully buy it. Thank you both for being on the show today.
Thank you for such a great, thoughtful interview. Your questions are deep and meaningful, so we thank you for them.
They are, and thank you for the work that you're doing to help build out this really important field.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Family Business Voice. Subscribe to our channels now on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, or Spotify to be notified of our weekly episodes.